In part 2 of this series, we followed MTB Squadron 13 on their mammoth slog from the Aleutians back to the lower 48 and left them spread out between Puget Sound and San Francisco mid-July 1944, either being loaded onto transport ships or on the way to a similar appointment. It's not until the 25th of August 1944 that the first boats start arriving at their new base in New Guinea. This promises a fairly quiet campaign and some R&R time on whites and beaches. Reality is that they won't get to enjoy it for long and will be transferred to a much more active theater later on. Let's just note for a moment that between April and June, important battles had been fought and won at Hollandia and Itapi by combined American and Australian troops who had pushed Japanese forces out of most of New Guinea and on over into Papua. They had left behind many POWs and also some skeleton squads intent on harassing and sabotaging the occupying Allies where possible. 31st August 1944, PT-75 arrives at Treasure Island, San Francisco, and PT-82 arrives at Milne Bay, New Guinea, aboard SS Edgar W. Nye. That's 5,600 nautical miles away. Early September 1944 has 4 boats moored at PT Base 2 in Dreger Bay and another 4 in Milne Bay. Throughout the months, the boats moved around between Dreger Bay, Milne Bay, Hollandia, and Itapi. At the end of September, all boats were moored at PT Base 21 at Miaswundi, minus PT 73 and 75, still to arrive from San Francisco. At this point, Ron 13 had a company of 265 enlisted men. One man had deserted. Miaswundi looks idyllic with its white sand beaches and is probably where this footage was taken. 3rd October, this month kicks off with nightly patrols of the area, ferrying scouts and evacuees. As you can see from these reports, many patrols resulted in drawing small arms or machine gun fire from the shore of the islands, with some injuries being sustained. 10th October, we see PT-82 patrolling Point Yori. At this point in her career, the boat is named the Boston Bastard, and the crew, many not yet old enough to buy a beer in the US, can fight and die in an obscene war, but the Navy doesn't like them to paint rude words on their torpedo boat, so it's covered up with a flak jacket in this footage. I don't know what is depicted in this footage as being set ablaze, although it looks like a fuel dump, and there's no record on Ron 13's war diary of such an engagement. Perhaps this film merges PT-82 into some of Ron 16's actions. I don't know. 12th October, another combined op with Ron 16, picking up Nika scouts from Rumbapon Island. Nika, by the way, is an abbreviation for the Dutch Civilian Colonial Administration. Most of the month is occupied with routine patrols interspersed with missions to collect rescued captives or civilians. Meanwhile, over in the Philippines, October 20th is of course marked by MacArthur's famous and staged landings on Leyte. 21st October, the boats are out collecting Korean and Formosan evacuees from Vandaman Bay. On the 28th, they are on patrol between Dore Bay and Rumbapon Island. PT-74 and 78 struck a large semi-submerged log, damaging the boats. You can see here the amount of ammunition that the squadron gets through during these regular shore bombardment harassment type of missions. In November, orders have come down the pipe to evacuate from New Guinea and to get ready for another open ocean transfer, this time to the Philippines. Between 13th and 19th November 44, the boats get an overhaul at Heelvink Bay on Biak Island near Miaswundi before being transferred to Leyte. It was considered very risky to have the PD boats race the 1,200 nautical miles directly from Heelvink Bay to Leyte. Since this trip was a trip across open ocean, they would have had to refuel by tender along the way, and the tenders themselves could only carry enough fuel for the trip and with very little left over for when they arrived. Rather than possibly have the tenders and the PD boats rock up to a hostile reception while almost out of fuel, it was decided that all 12 PT boats of RON 13 would travel about 550 nautical miles in convoy with the tenders AGP 8, 9, and 20, plus 29 other PT boats from other squadrons and 8 Army crash boats to Palau, which had been captured the month before. Once refueled there, they would head to Leyte, another 600 miles away. The tenders themselves would need to be refueled by tankers on each leg of the journey. 19th November, we were on convoy to Palau, arriving in Kosol on the 22nd. 24th November, we're departing Kosol, and 27th, arriving in San Pedro Bay, Leyte. On arriving at Leyte, it was decided that the PT boats had missed the party and were no longer needed there, being about a month late for the invasion. They were to be sent on to Mindoro instead, which is another 400 nautical miles. On 1st December, the boats are being overhauled in San Pedro Bay of Leyte before being transferred to Mindoro. Now things were going to get really busy for Squadron 13. The 12th of September saw the squadron transfer into Mindoro to support the invasion of that island. The next day at 1500 hours, a single Betty bomber made a kamikaze dive at the line of boats and crashed on one of the escorts before it could be taken under fire. Note that it's quite rare for bombers to be used in suicide attacks, which starts to give you an idea of just how desperate the Japanese were becoming at this time. Early morning on the 15th, a Sugar Charlie class of cargo boat is spotted dead ahead of the convoy and is quickly sunk by gunfire from an escort vessel. By 0700 hours, the escorts were busy firing on white, red, and blue beaches in preparation for landings there. The 19th Infantry go ashore at White Beach, with our old friends, the 503rd Parachute Infantry Regiment, taking red and blue beaches. I've done an entire series on the exploits of the 503rd PIR, on their actions in Operation Victor to liberate the Visayas, and you can see that on the link above. At 0730, a single Jake approached for an attack but was driven off by gunfire, and at 0900, 7 Zeeks tried to make suicide dives at the LSTs approaching the beach, the PT boats of Squadrons 13 and 16 shooting down 3 before they did any damage. By the end of the day, a beachhead was established that not only encompassed the town of San Jose, but also 3 airfields and Mangarin Bay, which was immediately adopted as the PT boat base for the region. The Japanese were, however, not done, and on the next day launched another kamikaze attack with 8 Zeeks approaching at 0830, with all planes being shot down or missing their targets and crashing in the bay. PT-75 bringing down one of the Zeeks outside the bay while underway to Ilin Island nearby. The next day brought renewed attack from Zeeks and Vals attempting to suicide dive into PT boats, but being evaded with several shot down. PT-75 again stood out for superior gunnery. A few days appear to have passed with the boats covering the army while they were conducting further landings at Pasagui and Calapan, again taking some damage which put several boats off of the active duty roster. Squadron 13 for this earned a Navy unit commendation for its support in the invasion, but the most dramatic action was actually yet to come. On December 20th, 2 bombers and many fighters returned, but were intercepted by combat air patrols, which shot down most of them. PT-73's gunners failed to hear orders to cease fire, and continuing to engage 1 Zeke at maximum range with its 40mm cannon, straddling the aircraft with shell bursts and setting it on fire, with the Zeke crashing shortly thereafter. On December 26th, a large force of Japanese troop and supply ships with destroyer escorts was spotted near Subic Bay, and another made up of 1 battleship, 1 cruiser, and 6 destroyers was seen approaching from the west. While the first group was being engaged by aircraft from Mindoro, the new group's appearance prompted the diversion of aircraft to verify its makeup and intentions. The Army and its Air Force were being directed to protect San Jose's airfields and forces at Caminoet Point, which is one side of Mangarin Bay. This was very bad timing given that the escort ships for the troop transports, several destroyers and destroyer escorts, had turned around and headed back to Leyte already, leaving the defense of the beachhead to the PT boats. Task Unit 70.1.4 was directed to coordinate directly with the 310th Bomb Wing and for the PT boats to take up station near the beachhead to protect it. But with the planes being out on a mission, it was impossible to hold a briefing to set up a joint PT boat plus bomber attack. With this news, the PT boats were broken into 4 units of 2 to 4 boats, with 1 unit given special mission at Abradillalog and the other specific areas to defend around Dongon Point, Ilin Island, and Mangarin Bay. The remaining 11 boats were unfit to operate in open water and instead were stationed around the bay as gun platforms and tasked with protecting the 4 Liberty ships, which were ordered to shelter there as best they could. Lieutenant Swart had been sent to Abradillalog to land a portable radar unit manned by Army and guerrilla personnel, but having spotted anti-aircraft fire about 30 miles to the south, they were ordered to reverse course to join in with the defense of the beachhead. The force sent to Ilin Island under Lieutenant Fargo observed the 1st Japanese force under attack from Allied aircraft at 2030 and observed the column approach on radar and sat in wait for them. At 21:55, they came under fire from 6 enemy ships and almost immediately following that under air attack as well. Running away at 30 knots, they believed the aircraft to be friendly as no enemy planes had been observed so far. Despite all attempts to contact the aircraft on VHF and having IFF in operation and running under smoke, they were strafed and a bomb went off close to PT-77. Several men were injured and the captain so badly he had to hand command to the XO. A man was blown off of PT-84 and left behind. At 23:50, PTs 80 and 82 ran aground at Ilin Island. The Boston Bastard was driven off, but PT-80 was stuck fast. The remaining 3 boats ran back to base under smoke. Entering Mangarin Bay, they witnessed the Liberty ship James H. Breasted set fire and start listing just as a B-25 was seen flying low over the bay. Meanwhile, the other group of 4 boats under Lieutenant Stillman had successfully escorted more merchant ships to Pandarochan Bay on Ilin Island, but then made radar contact with the same enemy force as Fargo and came under light from star shells at 21:40. Then he quickly came under fire from their guns just 6 miles away. While avoiding incoming gunfire, they came under attack from Allied aircraft, which dropped several small bombs around them but scored no hits. Still under Allied air attack, the Japanese group wheeled and changed course, heading back north. PT-81 requested permission to pursue but was refused because the enemy had not yet entered their defensive sector and Allied aircraft had not yet disengaged. Finally, the enemy appeared to withdraw under heavy air attack, and at 0100 hours, Stillman's group was ordered to go search for any likely landing sites on Ilin Island and look for enemy penetration. At around 22:45, Swart's group was about 10 miles southwest of Palawan Bay, and his crews spotted 5 enemy ships which were not under air attack coming down the coast from the north. A searchlight then suddenly appeared just 500 yards from PT-221, which belonged to a destroyer screening 2 much larger vessels that could be seen further offshore. They'd stumbled into the group with the battleship and the cruiser, which had snuck past the air defenses. PT-221 was spotted in the searchlight and quickly turned to run, making smoke for cover. 4-gun salvos were fired for 3 to 4 minutes, ringing PT-221, but scoring no hits. PT-223 was not spotted, and at 0105 launched 2 torpedoes at one of the destroyers from a range of about 2 miles. The torpedoes ran hot straight and normal, and 4 minutes later a flash of fire was observed, and no further gunfire from that bearing. After firing her torpedoes, PT-221 turned parallel to the shore and ran between the shore and the incoming force. Crews counted between 8 and 10 vessels, and at 0110 hours, PT-223 observed 2 of the ships heaving to, while the others continued down the coast. At 0220 hours, PT-221 observed these 2 lying 6 miles off of Dongun Point, but then turn and head north shortly after. Despite a high-speed chase, the 2 PTs could not close on the contacts, and at 0255 gave up the chase. All boats stood into Mangarin between 0300 and 0500 hours. December 27th, a dawn patrol by all seaworthy boats was ordered to locate any landings or survivors of the actions overnight. 3 Japanese Type 94 torpedoes were found on the shore of Mangarin Bay, unexploded. The man who had been blown off of PT-84 was recovered by PT-78, and at 1600 hours, PT-81 rescued 5 Japanese sailors 12 miles off of Malawaan Point, and a half an hour later, the body of a dead American pilot was recovered. In interrogation, the Japanese said they were the crew of the new destroyer Kiyoshimo, which had been damaged by 2 direct bomb hits and sunk by a single torpedo strike. 82 men were killed and 74 were injured. Another 169 crew had been picked up by the destroyer Asashimo. The commander of the 7th Fleet complained bitterly about the friendly bombing of PT-77 not being mentioned in the Army's reports about the incident, but this will not be PT-77's last friendly fire incident. The next day, 3 men patrolling the shoreline of Mangarin Bay killed a Japanese pilot who had taken refuge nearby. New Year's Eve was marked by the sinking of 2 Japanese barges, unmanned and adrift off the coast of Mindoro Island near Bongabong. So there were some fireworks and no one was killed, which is a nice way for the officers and crews of Squadron 13 to celebrate the new year. A lot warmer and probably more comfortable than the year prior. And that's where we're going to leave Squadron 13 for this video. In the next part, we'll be picking up on the continuing operations in the Philippines and the end of the war and the decommissioning of the boats. Thanks for watching.